Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Anita Anand and with me is Nishit Kumar bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the recent developments in Afghanistan. Taliban says it will not extend the deadline for the presence of US troops in Afghanistan beyond the 31st of August as G7 leaders meet to discuss Afghan situation. India raises issue of state-supported cross-border terrorism at the 11th BRICS NSA meet. Vice President of the United States Kamala Harris says Beijing continues to coerce and intimidate in the South China Sea. India's first mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine receives nod for Phase 2 and Phase 3 trials. In Tokyo, Paralympic Games begin with a glittering opening ceremony at Olympic Stadium. And in cricket, third test match between India and England to begin on Wednesday at Headingley in Leeds. As the nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact national helpline numbers 01123978046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the recent developments in Afghanistan. Both the leaders had a detailed and useful exchange of views on Afghanistan's situation. The Kremlin, in a press release, said that the 2 leaders exchanged views on the situation in Afghanistan, the importance of coordinated efforts in the establishment of peace and stability in the country. The 2 nations agreed to form a bilateral channel of consultations on the issue. The statement added that a number of issues related to the further development of the special and privileged partnership between Russia and India were also discussed. Mr. Modi expressed gratitude to Vladimir Putin for his assistance in combating the spread of COVID-19, including the supply and production of Russian vaccines in India, as well as the necessary medical equipment. In a tweet, Mr. Modi said that they also discussed issues on bilateral agenda, including India-Russia cooperation against COVID-19. They also agreed to continue consultations on important issues. The G7 leaders have called upon Taliban for adherence to obligations under international human rights law, including the rights of women, girls and minority groups, and that international humanitarian law is upheld in all circumstances. In a joint statement issued after a virtual meeting on Tuesday, the leaders affirmed that Afghan people deserve to live in dignity, peace and security, reflecting the last 2 decades of their political, economic and social achievements, in particular for women and girls. Afghanistan must never again become a safe haven for terrorism, nor a source of terrorist attacks on others. The statement added that their immediate priority is to ensure the safe evacuation of our citizens and those Afghans who have partnered with and assisted their efforts over the past 20 years, and to ensure continuing safe passage out of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the Taliban has said that it will not extend the deadline for the presence of US troops in Afghanistan beyond the 31st of August. Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid on Tuesday addressed a press conference in which he asked the US to leave Afghanistan by August 31st. According to reports, the Taliban has issued a fatwa in which their representatives in the Herat province have banned co-education in government and private universities. The move comes close on heels of the Taliban leaders vowing to respect the human rights of women in Afghanistan.
The United Nations top human rights official Michelle Bachelet on Tuesday said her office had received credible reports of grave human rights abuses by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Speaking at the 31st special session of the Human Rights Council on the serious human rights concerns and situation in Afghanistan, said that they have received credible reports of serious violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses taking place in many areas under the effective Taliban control. She added that there are grave fears for women, for journalists, and for the new generation of civil society leaders who have emerged in the past years. Citing the Taliban's pledges to protect and uphold the human rights in the country, Ms. Bachelet called upon the Taliban to translate their commitments into reality. India on Tuesday said that stability in Afghanistan is linked to the peace and security of the region. In a statement at the 31st special session of the Human Rights Council on the serious human rights concerns and situation in Afghanistan, permanent representative of India to the UN, Indramani Pandey, said the current situation prevailing in the country is of great concern to India. He hoped that the situation in Afghanistan does not pose a challenge to its neighbors and its territory is not used by terrorist groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed to threaten any other country.
India has always stood for a peaceful, prosperous and progressive Afghanistan. We stand ready to assist people of Afghanistan in fulfilling their aspirations. We hope that the situation stabilizes soon and the parties concerned address the humanitarian and security issues. We, the international community, must extend full support to the people of Afghanistan in their desire for peace, stability and security and enable all Afghans to live in peace and dignity.
Meanwhile, a total of 626 people, including 228 Indian citizens, have been evacuated from Afghanistan so far. Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri confirmed this in an address to the media over the Afghanistan evacuation operation dubbed Operation Devi Shakti. Alluding to the members of the Sikh community evacuated from Afghanistan, the minister also said that India will always support persecuted minorities. The BRICS High Representatives responsible for national security met on Tuesday and reviewed the regional and global political and security scenario with particular reference to current developments in Afghanistan, Iran, West Asia and the Gulf and emerging threats to national security such as cyber security. India's National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval, hosted the 11th meeting of the BRICS High Representatives responsible for national security through video conferencing. India raised the issue of cross-border terrorism and activities of groups such as the Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which enjoy state support and threaten peace and security. The External Affairs Ministry in a statement said that considerable attention was paid to the heightened risk of growth of illegal drug production and trafficking in the region. It was agreed that concerned agencies in BRICS countries will enhance their cooperation in this area. Health, safety and healthcare were also identified as a priority area of the cooperation within BRICS in the light of new challenges emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. In the area of cybersecurity, it was agreed to strengthen joint efforts to enhance cooperation by sharing of information and exchange of best practices, combat cyber crimes and capacity building. India had earlier hosted a BRICS workshop on digital forensics in August 2021. India holds the chairship of the BRICS this year, which coincides with the 15th anniversary of the BRICS grouping. The meeting of the High Representatives took place before the summit meeting of leaders of the BRICS nations that India will host this year under the chairship of Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi.
Vice President of the United States, Ms. Kamala Harris, said that the history of the 21st century will be centered in the Indo-Pacific. Making her remarks on the Indo-Pacific region on her visit to Singapore, Ms. Harris said that the partnerships in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, and throughout the Indo-Pacific are a top priority for the United States. She added that the Indo-Pacific is critically important to the U.S.'s security and prosperity. She said that the United States will pursue a free and open Indo-Pacific that promotes its interests and those of its partners and allies. Speaking on the threat to the vision of the Indo-Pacific, Ms. Harris said that in the South China Sea, Beijing continues to coerce, to intimidate and to make claims to the vast majority of the South China Sea. These unlawful claims have been rejected by the 2016 arbitral tribunal decision, and Beijing's actions continue to undermine the rules-based order and threaten the sovereignty of nations, she added. However, Ms. Harris added that their engagement in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific is not against any one country, nor is it designed to make anyone choose between the countries. Vice President Harris reaffirmed ASEAN's centrality in the region and said that the U.S. will also work multilaterally through long-standing institutions like ASEAN, which remain central to the region's architecture. We will also work with new results-oriented groups like the Quad and the U.S.-Mekong Partnership. India's COVID-19 vaccination coverage has crossed 59 crore 47 lakh mark. As per the 7 p.m. provisional report on Tuesday, the cumulative figure stands at 59 crore 47 lakh 65,751. The Health Ministry said that of the total vaccination, more than 46 crore vaccine doses have been administered as the first dose and 13 crore 45 lakh vaccine doses has been given as the second dose. The Ministry said over 54 lakh vaccine doses have been administered today to the beneficiaries. It added the vaccination exercise as a tool to protect the most vulnerable population groups in the country from COVID-19 continues to be regularly reviewed and monitored at the highest level.
India's first mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine has received a nod from the Drugs Controller General of India, DCGI, to move into Phase 2 and Phase 3 trials. Genova Biopharmaceuticals Limited, which is the Pune-based biotechnology company, is working on the mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine HGCO19. It submitted the interim clinical data of the Phase 1 study to the Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, CDSCO, which is the Government of India's National Regulatory Authority, NRA. The Ministry of Science and Technology in a statement said that the vaccine subject expert committee reviewed the interim Phase 1 data and found that HGCO19 vaccine is safe, tolerable and immunogenic. The vaccine is being developed in partnership with the Department of Biotechnology, DBT, Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council, BIRAC, under Mission COVID Suraksha. Now the coronavirus updates from around the world. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration on Monday approved the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. In a statement, the FDA said that the vaccine has been known as the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine and will now be marketed as Comirnaty for the prevention of the COVID-19 disease in individuals 16 years of age and older. The vaccine has been deployed for the vaccination drive in the country under an Emergency Use Authorization, EUA. The statement added that the FDA's approval of this vaccine is a milestone in the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, the Pentagon said on Monday that it is preparing to make COVID-19 vaccination mandatory in the armed forces after the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, fully approved the Pfizer jab. Tunisia's President Kais Saied has extended the suspension of the nation's parliament until further notice. The president's office in a statement on Monday said that the president also extended the suspension of the immunity of lawmakers. Saied had dismissed Prime Minister Hichem Mechichi and suspended the legislature in July. He said he had stated that he would assume executive authority in the country after the dismissal. Tunisia is facing mass protests over the government's handling of the COVID pandemic. According to the reports, Tunisians are angry about soaring COVID infection and death rates and its dire economic consequences. Meanwhile, the authorities in Saudi Arabia have announced that Indian nationals who have traveled to India after receiving both doses of the vaccine in Saudi Arabia will be able to return to the kingdom directly without need for quarantine in a third country. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Azadi Ka Safar every day with All India Radio from Monday the 16th of August. As part of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, News Services Division of All India Radio brings to you the story of glorious struggle and sacrifices of freedom fighters on 100.1 FM Gold channel in the English news bulletins at 8:30 a.m., 2 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the World News. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on global concerns on situation in Afghanistan. In conversation are Anil Wadhwa, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
We also see that Taliban has now taken control of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is headed towards a new government which will be dominated by the Taliban, and this has major security implications for India also. Ambassador Wadhwa, when we see this change happening in Afghanistan and we see this transition, how concerned should India be over this transition, and what does it entail for India?
So I think as far as India is concerned, whatever the government in Afghanistan, in this case the Taliban-led government, the main concern is that Taliban should not be used by any country or any group, against anyone, and more so against India. India has had many projects in Afghanistan, many reconstruction and infrastructure projects. And of course, the Taliban have said that if India wants, they can complete the projects because they are for the people. But it remains to be seen as to what the policies of the Taliban are going forward. And this will only be clear after a few days. One major concern that India does have with the Taliban control, it has the backing of countries like Pakistan, like China, Turkey, perhaps Russia and Iran very soon as well. And while the government in India has tried to talk about some red lines, but that came a little later. And also the lines of communication with the Taliban have not been very prominent in the recent past. So therefore, we will have to once again open up these channels of communication, and the Taliban would really go ahead, and it's expected that they would listen to Pakistan, and that the opening for India would be reduced if that control is maintained. Of course, if the Taliban government has been so far created, trained and controlled by Pakistan, that control one cannot imagine will be loosened so easily. One must also remember that the highest ranking body of the Taliban is the Quetta Shura, named after the Pakistani town where they were based. And while the Taliban leadership may not like a total control from Pakistan, they do have deep roots, they have familiar connections and business investments in Pakistan. So certainly they will not have much of a reason to turn against Pakistan and immediately have a friendly handshake with a country like India. Second is the issue of security. The first is the top leadership of the Taliban itself, which includes Sirajuddin Haqqani. If you recall, his father, Jalaluddin Haqqani, was a minister in the Taliban government when the Indian Airlines flight IC-814 was hijacked and taken to Kandahar. We should also remember that the Jaish-e-Mohammed, which has links with the Taliban, was responsible for the 2001 parliament attack and also has been charged with the 2019 Pulwama suicide bombing. Also, the Haqqani network has been responsible for 2 attacks on the Indian embassy in Kabul in 2008 and 2009. And it was at that time suggested by US intelligence that the Haqqani network and Pakistan's ISI were behind the attack. The 2009 bombing of the Indian embassy in Kabul had led to the death of about 17 people, 83 people were wounded. So the threat which is confronting India is that if terrorism returns in Afghanistan and if these terrorist groups are supported, promoted by Pakistan, then of course they will be emboldened and motivated to carry out similar attacks in neighboring countries like India. So security is the main concern, and as I said, we have to watch out for the stance that Taliban adopts in the coming days.
Ambassador Wadhwa, as you mentioned about Pakistan, and we have seen that India and Pakistan have had tense relations, and there are border disputes not only with Pakistan today, that goes for China also. And we see China taking a greater interest in Afghanistan this time. We saw end of July a Taliban delegation also visiting China, and the statements that we have seen coming out of China seem eager to recognize the Taliban government in Afghanistan. How do you think this complicates the situation for India when we see that 2 countries like Pakistan and China, with whom we have tense relations, getting a strong playing hand in Afghanistan?
So there is, of course, clear indication that China seems to be working rather closely with Pakistan and Afghanistan, and that is included excluding India from all serious deliberations in the recent past. And that needs to be noted. With China unwilling to relent, the situation on the border, we know, remains tense. Ceasefire on the line of control with Pakistan seems fragile with every passing day. And so if India's northern and western borders look bad, the rise of Taliban following the US exit is going to make that worse. Obviously, India would seem to be encircled on its strategic frontiers at this moment. But, while the crisis in Afghanistan is huge, it has only further highlighted the problems which it has created for New Delhi, especially from the strategic and the security point of view. So I would agree that unless the situation looks better in terms of what the policies adopted by the Taliban themselves, or the fact that the countries who are now supporting the Taliban come to realize that it is going to be better to have a government which does not support terrorism next to them, the situation for India will continue to look bad.
Mr. Bajwa, we also see that Moscow and Iran are also taking a keen interest in Afghanistan, and they seem to be interested in seeing how their own regional interests play out as we see Afghanistan in this state of transition. And the feelers that one gets is also that both China, Russia are likely to recognize the Taliban government once it is formed. How do you think the fact that you have players like Iran and Russia also taking an active interest in Afghanistan, do you think this might make things a little easier for India, or do you think that they will primarily be concerned about their own interests and this is not going to be too much of help to India?
Taliban representatives have been engaging with Russia for quite some time, lately also with Iran many times. And this engagement has come about mainly because the Pakistanis were willing. Pakistanis, which control the Taliban, have been willing for them to open out these channels with Russia and with Iran. The support and understanding by these countries who are in the immediate vicinity for the Taliban remains important. It's also important for Russia that its underbelly is not exposed to terrorists who can move out, especially the ISIS, into Russian territories. It is also important for Iran that it does not see another influx of refugees. It also needs to preserve its interests as far as the ethnic minorities in Afghanistan are concerned. And there is, of course, the underlying Sunni-Shia divide, which has bedeviled relationships between the Taliban and Iran in the past. So obviously, they would be looking for accommodation there. Iran itself and Russia has been under sanctions from the United States. And so their primary interest was to see the departure of the United States from Afghanistan, which has now happened. The presence of Russia and Iran in the equation is not necessarily bad for India because they would certainly be much better as influencers than countries like Pakistan or China, with whom India seems to be having a relationship which has not seen any improvement in the recent past. In fact, the conditions as I described on the border, both the borders, are not looking good at the moment. And so therefore, in this mix, all that India can do is to watch the developments and work as much as possible through the others. In fact, as you've seen, there's been a shuttle diplomacy which has been carried out by the External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, who's been to Iran and who's been to Moscow and, in fact, has opened up some channels with the Taliban. So I think that process will continue and India will try to minimize the security effects of a Taliban takeover in Afghanistan.
Mr. Vatva, as you mentioned about the U.S. pullout, and we have seen that India and the U.S. have very deep relationship today, and in terms of the defense cooperation, a strategic relationship. But we've also seen, as we've followed the events unfolding in Afghanistan, that it seems to be a retreat for the United States. And it seems, as many analysts have pointed out, also a defeat of the United States in Afghanistan. Do you feel that the West seems to have suffered a defeat in Afghanistan, and that could embolden countries like Pakistan and other anti-West front? Do you think that adds to India's complications?
So I think, it's very dramatic to use the word defeat as far as the United States is concerned. The decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was taken by the Biden administration much earlier. It's been known for quite some time, and the Biden administration has been negotiating with the Taliban in Doha for quite a few months now. As a matter of fact, the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was sought to be changed many times by Americans themselves, members of Congress, and also by other parties, other countries. But the United States has carried out its decision. Now, in that light, to call it a defeat would not be entirely correct. Of course, the manner of the withdrawal leaves much to be desired. I do not think that the withdrawal, the way it has taken place hastily and under great pressure as far as the United States is concerned, was something that the United States would have preferred. And obviously, it was an arrangement which has gone sour at a late stage.
With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
And moving on to sports, after successfully hosting the Summer Olympic Games, the Japanese capital is hosting the Summer Paralympic Games. The global sporting spectacle has begun with a glittering opening ceremony at the Olympic Stadium in Tokyo today. The main concept for the opening ceremony is We Have Wings. An 11-member Indian group is participating in the opening ceremony. Javelin thrower Tek Chand is India's flag bearer at the Tokyo Paralympics opening ceremony after Mariyappan Thangavelu was quarantined following close contact with a COVID-19 positive person during their flight to Tokyo. 54 athletes are set to compete in 9 sporting disciplines, including archery, athletics, badminton, swimming, and weightlifting, among others. And the third of the 5 test matches between India and England will begin on Wednesday at Headingley in Leeds, West Yorkshire. The visitors are ahead by 1-0 in the series and will be hoping to make it 2-0. The match will begin at 3:30 p.m. IST.
And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian writes phones of 9 Bahraini activists found to have been hacked with NSO spyware. The Guardian writes New Zealand records another 41 COVID cases as it braces for biggest outbreak of pandemic. The Washington Post says CIA Director William Burns held secret meeting in Kabul with Taliban leader Abdul Ghani Baradar. The Globe and Mail say Israel bombs Hamas sites in Gaza over fire balloons. Sputnik News reports scientists come up with new model of neutron stars to help clarify Einstein's general theory. Gulf Times say Philippines Duarte agrees to run as vice president in 2022.
India's Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Bhupender Yadav, on Tuesday held a telephonic conversation with U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Mr. John Kerry, to discuss climate action and finance mobilization dialogue, CAFMD, track under India-U.S. Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership, and other related issues. In a statement, the government said that both sides agreed that India and the USA will engage for a constructive engagement under the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the recent developments in Afghanistan. Taliban says it will not extend the deadline for the presence of US troops in Afghanistan beyond 31st of August as G7 leaders meet to discuss Afghan situation. India raises issue of state-supported cross-border terrorism at the 11th BRICS NSA meet. Vice President of the United States Kamala Harris says Beijing continues to coerce and intimidate in South China Sea. India's first mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine receives nod for Phase 2 and Phase 3 trials. In Tokyo, Paralympics Games begin with a glittering opening ceremony at Olympic Stadium. And in cricket, third test match between India and England to begin on Wednesday at Headingley in Leeds. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Ukraine on their National Day.
Jana
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.